I never imagined the words gold digger would ever find their way to me, especially not from my own granddaughter-in-law, standing in my late husband's mansion with a wine glass in her manicured hand. The insult slipped out as casually as a yawn, but it hit like a slap across 60 years of dignity. Guess Grandpa married you for your looks back then, she laughed, tilting her head toward the family portraits on the wall. Or maybe you married him for the bank account. Either way, lucky you, huh? The laughter that followed wasn't hers alone. My grandson Matthew smirked behind his drink, the same boy I once carried to the bus stop in winter, his mittens dangling by strings. He didn't defend me, not even a nervous cough, not even an enough honey. I stood there, clutching the serving tray I had brought out for them, my hands trembling under the weight of it. The crystal glasses rattled slightly, catching the glow from the chandelier my late husband George had imported from Milan the year before his heart attack. That chandelier was the only thing in this house I'd never changed, not because I couldn't, but because it reminded me of what loyalty looked like before it went out of fashion. I forced a smile. Eat while it's warm, I said softly. The same words I'd said 1,000 times over the decades, to my husband, my son, and later, to the boy who now stood beside a woman who thought I'd married for money. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the house, the company, and the fortune she flaunted in were mine long before she ever learned to spell dividends. But it wasn't always like that. When George passed away 10 years ago, his will had been a quiet storm. He'd left his construction company, Henderson and Company, entirely to me, with a single clause: if I ever chose to retire, the next CEO must be a family member of good character and sound judgment. My son, Harold, fit neither. Matthew, at the time, was still too busy spending tuition money on luxury watches. So I stayed. I kept the company afloat, negotiated contracts, and balanced ledgers while pretending to be an old lady who baked cookies for board meetings. It wasn't glamour. It was survival, one spreadsheet at a time. But as Matthew married into money, things changed. His new wife, Tiffany, came from the kind of family that measured worth in carats and contacts. She had a nose for social status and a smile that looked borrowed from a magazine cover. The first time she called me sweetheart, I knew she was counting how long I had left. Last Christmas, she began redecorating my home without asking, swapping my floral drapes for velvet, my china plates for matte black dinnerware. Modern touches, she called them. It's what this place needs. Then came the dinner party. That night, as she entertained their circle of friends, I noticed how she introduced herself. I'm Tiffany Henderson, she said, pressing her hand against Matthew's chest. We're the new generation running the family business. I choked on my water. Running? I still sat at the head of every board meeting. But she looked straight at me then, her smile sharp. We'll take good care of what Grandpa built. Won't we, Grandma? That we was her way of erasing me. After the guests left, I walked into my study and opened the drawer where George's pen still rested, solid gold, engraved with his initials. I hadn't signed a company document with it since his funeral. That night, I did. I transferred 10% of the company shares into a trust under my maiden name. Quietly. Legally. Completely invisible to their prying eyes. I also called my assistant, Evelyn, a woman half Tiffany's age but twice her intelligence. Start running payroll manually for the next cycle, I told her. Under the new approval system I'll handle personally. Evelyn hesitated. You're changing authorization again? Yes, I said, staring at the chandelier. Let's just say I'd like to know exactly whose signature signs the checks these days. That was 3 months ago. Now, standing in my living room while Tiffany twirled her wine and mocked the wrinkles around my eyes, I realized the time had come to let the first domino fall. Matthew set his glass down. Come on, Grandma. Don't take it personally. She's just joking. I met his eyes. Is that what you call it? He shrugged. You know how young people are. Anyway, we'll be taking over the house soon, right? You mentioned moving somewhere smaller. The tray slipped from my hands. The crash silenced everything, the laughter, the whispers, even Tiffany's smirk. Crystal scattered across the marble floor like frozen tears. I didn't bend to pick them up. I just looked at him and said very quietly, Matthew, who told you that? He blinked, confused. Dad said you were finalizing the transfer papers. He said you wanted us to settle in before next spring. Transfer papers. There were no transfer papers. Not yet. Tiffany's voice cut through the tension. Maybe it's for the best, Grandma. A smaller place will be easier for you. Besides, this house deserves young energy. You know, people who actually belong here. I felt my breath tighten. Belong here. For a moment, I almost answered her the way I used to, gentle, forgiving, patient. Then I remembered George's will. His handwriting. The word, character. The next morning, I called my lawyer. David, I said, I need you to open the Henderson and Company payroll for review. Discreetly. Of course, he said. Is there a problem? I looked at the empty coffee cup beside me, still faintly stained from Tiffany's lipstick. Not yet, I said. But there will be. That afternoon, I went to the office for the first time in weeks. The employees greeted me with the same warm smiles they always had. Good morning, Mrs. Henderson, they said. Good morning, indeed. As I passed through the finance department, I caught Evelyn's eye. She nodded, sliding an envelope across her desk. Inside were the new payroll sheets, each check authorized under my signature, each one signed with George's pen. Every single one bore my initials, MEH. Margaret Elizabeth Henderson. The same initials Tiffany never bothered to learn. I walked back home feeling oddly calm. There's a certain power in silence when you know the truth, and when the people mocking you are living off your name, your work, and your paycheck. That evening, Tiffany called from the balcony, holding up her phone. Smile, Grandma. We're taking a photo for the family legacy post. I smiled. Oh, how I smiled. Because tomorrow morning, she'd receive a company email she wouldn't understand, one that would make her call me in confusion, maybe even panic. And when she did, I'd be waiting, coffee in hand, to remind her exactly who signed the check she cashed every Friday. But before I could finish my thought, the doorbell rang. Hard. Urgent. When I opened it, a man in a dark suit stood there, holding an envelope. Mrs. Henderson? He asked. Yes. He handed me the envelope. You've been served. My stomach dropped. The return address read, Henderson and Company. Legal Division. I tore it open and froze. At the bottom of the page, next to the company letterhead, was Tiffany's signature. The letter trembled in my hands as I read the first line again. Notice of immediate suspension from executive duties, Henderson and Company. Suspension. From my own company. The one I'd built brick by brick beside my husband, while my son and grandson played golf on the weekends. At the bottom of the page, Tiffany's name sat in bold, Self-Satisfied Inc., Chief Executive Consultant. A title she'd likely invented for herself. I sat down slowly, my knees weak, the chandelier's light flickering above me like the pulse of something dying. The legal jargon blurred, breach of fiduciary responsibility, unauthorized share transfer, pending investigation, words meant to intimidate, not to inform. She was trying to freeze me out of my own empire. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the fire, reading and rereading the notice until dawn. It was clever, too clever for Tiffany alone. Someone had helped her craft it. Someone who knew the company's internal bylaws. And I knew exactly who that someone was, my son Harold. I could almost hear his voice from years ago, when he'd asked George for an early inheritance. Why wait till you're gone, Dad? You can trust me. He'd squandered that money in 2 years, on bad investments and worse friends. After George's death, I refused to sign another cent over to him. And that resentment festered. Now, I was paying for it. 2 days later, I arrived at the company headquarters. The security guard, someone I'd known for 15 years, looked uneasy. I'm sorry, Mrs. Henderson, he said. There's been a directive. You're not authorized to enter without board approval. I stared at him. Board approval? I am the board. He winced. Ma'am, please, if I let you in, I'll lose my job. Behind the glass doors, I could see Tiffany striding through the lobby, her stilettos clacking against the marble. She was wearing one of my old pearls, the ones George had given me on our 40th anniversary. She waved politely, as if this were a misunderstanding between neighbors. Grandma, she called out. Oh, you got the notice. We were just about to call. I forced a thin smile. You sent me a legal suspension and called that notice? Her laugh was light, airy, rehearsed. It's just procedural, don't worry. Some accounting discrepancies came up under your name, and we have to investigate. Nothing personal. Nothing personal, I repeated, tasting the lie. Behind her, I caught sight of Harold, my son, pretending to study his phone. He couldn't even look at me. I turned away before my voice could break. You'll regret this, I said quietly. Both of you will. Tiffany smiled wider. I'm sure we'll all look back on this and laugh someday. By the end of the week, gossip had already spread through the family. My sister-in-law, Judith, called to check in. I heard there's trouble with the company, she said, her tone sweet as syrup. You're not losing the house, are you? Not yet, I said. But they're trying. Oh dear. At your age, that must be hard. At my age. It's funny how age suddenly becomes everyone's favorite excuse for cruelty. Even the local paper ran a piece, Matriarch faces allegations of corporate mismanagement. Tiffany's PR team had clearly been busy. Each night I ate dinner alone at the long dining table, staring at the empty seats where my family used to sit. The air was heavy with silence, until the mail arrived again. A second envelope. This one was worse. Notice of eviction, primary residence to be liquidated pending asset investigation. They were going after the house. The home George and I had built 50 years ago, with our initials carved into the oak banister. The same house Tiffany now called too big for one old woman. I pressed the paper against my chest, the pain hot and steady. Then I folded it neatly, placed it back in the envelope, and set it on the mantel beside George's photograph. You always said they'd turn on each other for money, I whispered. You were wrong, George. They turned on me. The next morning, I received a call from Evelyn, my assistant. Mrs. Henderson, she whispered, something's wrong. Tiffany's team requested access to last quarter's payroll history, including the special authorization accounts, the ones under your name. My blood ran cold. Did you give it to them? Of course not, she said. But they're insisting it's a board order. That meant they were closing in. If they uncovered the trust I'd created months ago, they'd try to use it as proof of embezzlement. I could already imagine the headlines. I thanked Evelyn and hung up. Then I dialed my lawyer, David. They're moving faster than expected, I said. Can we freeze their access to internal accounts? Legally? Not yet, he replied. But I can file a counterclaim citing undue influence and elder exploitation. I smiled faintly. Elder exploitation. I suppose it's finally useful to be called old. David chuckled softly. Margaret, you fought tougher battles. Don't let them see you rattle. Oh, I won't, I said. But I'll let them think I am. That weekend, Tiffany and Matthew hosted a family brunch to clear the air. Of course, everyone showed up, Judith, my nephew, even a few shareholders they'd conveniently invited. The house smelled of cinnamon rolls and deceit. As I entered, Tiffany greeted me with open arms. Grandma. So glad you came. We were just talking about family unity. I looked around. Family unity doesn't require signatures, dear. Just honesty. She laughed, dismissing the sting. Oh, don't be dramatic. Let's sit and talk this through like adults. I sat at the far end of the table, the place George used to occupy during Sunday brunches. As Tiffany poured mimosas, she began her little speech. Matthew and I just want to ensure a smooth transition for the business and family assets. Grandma's worked so hard, and we think it's time she relaxes and lets us handle things. After all, we all have the company's best interest at heart. Applause followed. Weak, hesitant, but applause nonetheless. I took a slow sip of water, then placed the glass down deliberately. You're right, I said calmly. It's time I rest. I've earned it. Her eyes lit up. Exactly. We'll make this as easy as possible for you. But before I do, I added, there's one thing you should both know. Matthew leaned forward. What's that? I smiled thinly. You might want to check whose name appears on your direct deposit slips next Friday. The room fell silent. Tiffany blinked. What do you mean? Oh, nothing. Just bookkeeping details. I've always handled payroll myself, remember? A flicker of confusion crossed her face, quickly replaced by irritation. We've already transferred those rights. Everything's automated now. Has it processed yet? I asked sweetly. She hesitated. Not yet, but it will by Monday. Good, I said. Then I'll enjoy the weekend. That night, as the house quieted, I felt the familiar ache of exhaustion, but beneath it, something else stirred, defiance. I had spent my entire life caring, giving, forgiving. But this time, I wasn't going to beg for kindness. I opened my late husband's safe, the one behind the painting in the study. Inside, the scent of old leather and ink greeted me. Contracts, share certificates, and an envelope marked in case of betrayal. George had left it there years ago. I'd never opened it. Until now. Inside, a handwritten note. If anyone ever tries to take from you what we built, show them the clause I added to Article 14. The company belongs to whoever holds the founder's signature rights. You hold mine. Attached was the original founder's deed, sealed and notarized. A weapon disguised as paperwork. I sat back in my chair, trembling, not from fear this time, but from power. For the first time in months, I slept soundly. On Monday morning, my phone buzzed. It was Evelyn, breathless. Mrs. Henderson, you need to see this. Tiffany's been in the office all morning, furious. The payroll system crashed because it requires dual verification, yours and the founder's. And since George's signature is archived under your access code, she can't approve a single payment, I finished for her. Exactly. I allowed myself a quiet laugh. Let her stew for a while. Tell her the gold digger granny must have taken her shovel back. Evelyn snorted, trying to contain her laughter. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Oh, immensely. But it's only the beginning. That afternoon, Tiffany showed up at my doorstep again, this time, no pearls, no polite smile. Her makeup was smudged, her composure cracked. What did you do? She hissed. The payroll system's locked. None of the staff can get paid until you authorize it. The entire office is calling me useless. I shrugged. Strange. Maybe that's because you are. You can't just. Can't I? I interrupted softly. I built that company from the ground up. I know its bones, its breath. You think you can waltz in with your designer handbags and corporate jargon and take it from me? You couldn't even read the bylaws correctly. Her jaw clenched. You're going to regret this. Oh, I already do, I said. Regret ever letting you step into my house. She stormed out, slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled. I exhaled slowly. The satisfaction was brief, but it tasted sweet. Still, I knew better than to underestimate her. Greed doesn't rest. The next day, another notice arrived, this time a full-blown lawsuit, Tiffany Henderson versus Margaret Henderson, citing fraudulent ownership transfer and obstruction of corporate operations. A war had officially begun. I called David immediately. File a countersuit, I said. Use Article 14 as our shield. And prepare the board records. I want every meeting transcript since George's death pulled. Are you sure you want to take this public? He asked. Yes, I said, looking at the chandelier. It started in my house. It'll end in my company. That evening, I sat by the window as the sun dipped behind the hills. The light caught the framed photo of George on the shelf, his eyes kind but steady. I'm fighting them, George, I whispered. And this time, I won't be kind. The phone rang again. It was Evelyn. Mrs. Henderson, she said, her voice urgent. You need to see something. Tiffany's called a press conference. She's going public with her story about your mismanagement. It's on every local channel. I turned on the television. There she was, Tiffany, standing behind a podium, crocodile tears glistening. I only wanted to protect our family's legacy, she said, voice trembling perfectly. But when love turns into greed, sometimes even family can betray you. The reporters nodded sympathetically. Cameras flashed. Headlines scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Corporate scandal, Henderson matriarch under fire. I felt my chest tighten, not from shame but from fury. She had just declared war on me publicly. And as her false tears streamed across every television in the city, I made a silent promise to myself. She wanted a public fight. She'd get one. But she'd never see the ending coming. The morning after Tiffany's press conference, the phone would not stop ringing. Journalists, board members, even old friends I hadn't spoken to in years, all wanting a comment. I gave them silence. Let her bask in her 15 minutes of fame. I had something better than outrage, proof. I closed the blinds, brewed myself a cup of black tea, and sat at the mahogany desk where George used to draft his contracts. The old pen still rested there, its gold tip dull with age. I dipped it in ink and began writing a list, one that would determine who stood with me and who would drown with her. At the top, Evelyn, trustworthy, loyal. Then, David, my lawyer, cautious but clever. And below that, Harold, weak. Motivated by money. Unreliable. When I finished, I leaned back and whispered, "All right, George. Let's see if your old tricks still work." I unlocked the safe again and pulled out the dusty brown folder marked Founder's Clause. The document inside was over 40 years old, but the ink was sharp, the seal intact. It stated, in legal precision, that control of Henderson and Company rested solely with the holder of the founder's signature rights, and that the rights could only be transferred by a notarized handover signed in front of 2 witnesses. George had never done that. Which meant the power had never left me. They could sue, shout, and slander all they wanted, but without those rights, Tiffany and Harold had no legal claim to the company. None. But power only mattered if you could prove it. The next morning, I called Evelyn to the house. She arrived in her usual crisp navy suit, her hair tied back, her eyes full of concern. "I've been monitoring the company emails," she said, lowering her voice. "They're changing internal systems, trying to erase your admin access completely." "Good," I said calmly. "Let them try." She blinked. "Good. Yes. Because while they're busy rewriting systems, I'll be rewriting the story." I slid the Founder's Clause across the table. She read it once, her mouth slowly parting in disbelief. "They have no idea this exists." "They don't," I said. "And they won't, until it's too late." I handed her a second folder. Inside are copies of every board meeting minute since George's death. I need you to cross-check them against the financial records. Look for signatures, anything forged, duplicated, or inconsistent. Her eyes lit with quiet determination. "You're building a case." "I'm building their destruction," I replied softly. "One signature at a time." For 2 weeks, we worked in silence. Days were for tea and paper trails, nights for whispered strategy calls with David. Outside, the media frenzy grew. Tiffany's crocodile tears had gained her sympathy. Articles called her a visionary wife, trying to save a collapsing family business from an elderly matriarch's stubborn grip. Let them write. Paper burns easily. Evidence doesn't. One afternoon, Evelyn burst into my study, breathless. "Mrs. Henderson, you need to see this." She laid out a document, a board authorization letter filed 6 months ago, supposedly signed by me. But the signature was wrong. Too clean. Too practiced. Too recent. I smiled coldly. There it is. The first nail. Evelyn frowned. "You're sure it's fake?" I picked up George's gold pen, signed my name beside it, and placed both under the lamp. "Compare the E's," I said. "Mine loop. That one doesn't." She nodded, excitement flickering in her eyes. "Forgery." "Exactly," I said. "And now we have grounds for criminal investigation." That night, I met David at his downtown office. The room smelled faintly of tobacco and old leather. He skimmed the document and whistled. "This is good," he said. "We can file an injunction to freeze their assets and expose the forgery in court. It'll turn the lawsuit on its head." "Do it quietly," I warned. "Let them keep thinking they're winning." He grinned. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" I smiled faintly. Revenge is just justice with better timing. Before I left, he handed me an envelope. "By the way, I found something you might want. Your grandson Matthew applied for a personal loan using Henderson and Company as collateral." Tiffany co-signed. My heart clenched. When? 2 weeks ago. So that was their plan. They wanted to bankrupt the company, force liquidation, then sell the property, including my house, to cover the loss. Every cruelty had a price tag. I left David's office under a cold drizzle. The city lights blurred through the rain, glowing gold like George's pen tip. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. They thought they'd buried me under paperwork. They didn't realize I'd built the ground they stood on. Days later, Evelyn called again, her voice trembling with excitement. "Mrs. Henderson, you won't believe what I found." She sent me a scanned copy of an email, Tiffany to Harold, discussing redirecting company funds into a private account registered under Henderson Legacy Holdings. The email ended with, "Once the old woman's name is off the records, we'll dissolve the trust quietly." They'd left a trail. A digital one. I closed my eyes and let out a slow breath. Forward this to David. And Evelyn, back everything up on a private drive. Not the company's system. Yes, ma'am. That evening, I sat by the fire with my tea, staring into the flames. The anger had burned away long ago, what remained was focus. Cold, deliberate, and sharp as glass. They wanted a war in the court of public opinion. I wanted one in the court of law. And mine would be written in ink, not headlines. A week later, David called. "We're ready to file." Once this hits, Tiffany's entire image collapses. Fraud, forgery, misappropriation, all under her signature. "Perfect," I said. "But wait for my signal." "What signal?" "The one I'll give at the board meeting." He chuckled. "You're really doing this publicly?" "Oh yes," I said, smiling into the phone. "If she wants an audience, I'll give her one." The board meeting was scheduled for Thursday, Tiffany's idea, to finalize the generational transition. She arrived in her usual parade of perfection, sleek white blazer, diamonds flashing, her expression all honey and venom. Matthew trailed behind her, looking less confident than usual. Harold stood near the window, pretending to check his watch. As I entered, silence rippled through the room. Every eye followed me, the woman they'd called senile, manipulative, outdated. I took the seat at the head of the table. "My seat." Tiffany offered a brittle smile. "Grandma, you made it. We were just about to start." "I wouldn't miss it," I said. "After all, I helped build this table." A few nervous chuckles drifted around the room. Tiffany cleared her throat. "As you all know, we're here to approve a leadership change. For too long, this company has suffered under outdated management. My husband and I are prepared to modernize operations and restore public confidence." I let her finish her rehearsed speech. Then I placed a thick folder on the table and slid it toward her. "Before you continue," I said, "you might want to read this." She frowned. "What is it?" "Proof," I said. "Of forgery, embezzlement, and the small matter of a fake signature you filed 6 months ago." Her smile faltered. "Excuse me." I nodded to Evelyn, who entered the room carrying a laptop. She connected it to the screen. A series of emails, signatures, and document timestamps appeared. "Every digital trail leads to your account, Tiffany," I said. "And the loan you filed with Henderson and Company as collateral? That's fraud. I've already filed a notice of injunction through my attorney." Murmurs filled the room. Tiffany's face drained of color. "You can't just." "Can't I?" I said softly. "Read Article 14 of the Founders' Charter." I pulled the ancient document from my bag and placed it on the table. "The company belongs to whoever holds the founder's signature rights," I said. "George never transferred his. I hold them still." Harold's mouth fell open. "That can't be true." "Oh, but it is." I smiled thinly. "Your father's handwriting. His seal. His claws." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Tiffany pushed back her chair, fury flashing in her eyes. "You planned this. You set me up." "No, dear," I said calmly. "You set yourself up. I simply left the trap where you'd find it." The room erupted, voices, papers shuffling, phones buzzing. Tiffany's lawyer tried to interject, but the board members had already turned. Evelyn handed them copies of the evidence packet. Within minutes, the board voted unanimously to reinstate me as sole executive authority pending investigation. Tiffany's title, Chief Executive Consultant, was suspended indefinitely. As she stood there shaking, I leaned forward. "Oh, and Tiffany, One more thing. Payroll goes out tomorrow. You might want to check whose name is still on your paycheck. Her lips trembled. You'll pay for this. I smiled. No, dear. You will. She stormed out, Matthew trailing after her, too cowardly to look back. Harold lingered. Mother, he whispered, I never meant for it to go this far. Yes, you did, I said. You just didn't expect to lose. That night, I sat alone in my study, the chandelier light soft above me. The war wasn't over, Tiffany would fight back, but the tide had turned. I opened George's old letter again, tracing his handwriting with my finger. You always did know how to protect me, I murmured. Even from beyond. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I answered. Hello. A low voice replied, shaky but familiar. Mrs. Henderson? This is a private investigator. Your lawyer hired me to trace the offshore accounts tied to the Henderson legacy holdings. You might want to sit down. I frowned. Why? Because the accounts aren't in Tiffany's name, he said. They're in your son's. Harold Henderson. The world seemed to tilt. My own son. He hadn't just helped her, he'd orchestrated it. When I learned Harold was the one behind it all, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply sat there, staring at the empty space where his father's photograph used to hang before Tiffany redecorated the house. It was as if the silence itself mocked me, a lifetime of love, motherhood, sacrifice, all traded for greed. My lawyer's words echoed over the phone. It was Harold. He's the primary beneficiary of the offshore accounts. Tiffany was just the front. I remember whispering, my son sold me for the same company his father built. David paused. Do you want to pursue criminal charges against him too? I stared at the old chandelier, its gold chains gleaming faintly like judgment. No, I said quietly. I want him to face me first. The hearing was scheduled 2 weeks later, a joint board and legal arbitration that would determine ownership of Henderson and Company. It wasn't technically a courtroom, but it might as well have been. Long mahogany tables, sharp suits, whispered gossip, and enough tension to choke on. Reporters gathered outside. The headlines had shifted tone lately: matriarch strikes back, family feud at Henderson Empire, the Golden Granny War. Tiffany's press conference had started the fire, but now the public wanted to see who'd burn. When I arrived, people fell silent. I wore black, not for mourning, but for message. A silk scarf around my neck, George's fountain pen in my hand. Evelyn walked beside me, her posture straight, her face unreadable. Inside, Tiffany sat across the table, glaring daggers. Harold sat beside her, pale and fidgeting, eyes avoiding mine. Matthew was nowhere to be seen. I imagined he finally learned that loyalty has a price, and his wife had overdrawn his account. David leaned toward me. Remember, let them speak first. Then drop the documents. I nodded. Like old times, He smiled faintly. You've got a flair for drama, Margaret. Comes with age, I whispered. The company's legal counsel began the session. Mrs. Henderson, he said, today's hearing concerns allegations of mismanagement, unauthorized fund transfers, and misuse of corporate authority. Your son Harold and his wife Tiffany maintain that your recent actions were intended to defraud the company. I said nothing. I only looked at Harold, my son, my only child, and saw in his eyes the same restless hunger that once made George sigh in disappointment. Mr. Henderson, the lawyer continued, would you like to present your case? Harold cleared his throat. My mother, she's not herself anymore. She's been under a lot of stress since my father passed. Tiffany and I only stepped in to protect the family business. We found irregularities, missing funds, unusual transfers. Unusual transfers? I interrupted softly. He froze. Yes. We just wanted to help. I leaned forward. By creating offshore accounts in your own name? The room went still. Tiffany's head snapped toward him. What is she talking about? I reached into my folder and slid a printed bank statement across the table. Henderson Legacy Holdings. Cayman Islands Branch. Primary signatory, Harold Henderson. Secondary, Tiffany Henderson. Gasps rippled through the room. The board members whispered furiously. Harold's voice cracked. How did you? I built this company, Harold, I said. Did you really think I wouldn't recognize my own accountant's format? You used George's old offshore account system, the one we closed after his passing. You just changed the password and thought no one would notice. Tiffany turned to him, fury flashing. You told me this was legal. You said it was to protect us from taxes. It was, he snapped. Until I what? I cut in. Until I started breathing again? The judge tapped his pen. Please, Mrs. Henderson, remain composed. Oh, I am composed, I said, eyes fixed on my son. But I've been quiet long enough. I rose slowly, placing my palms on the polished wood. When George died, he left behind more than a business, he left integrity. Every brick of Henderson and Company was laid by a man who believed honesty mattered more than profit. I kept that alive for 30 years. Alone. While my son wasted his inheritance and his wife planned her next handbag launch. A nervous laugh flickered somewhere in the room, quickly silenced. Then, I continued, they decided I was too old, too slow, too easy to manipulate. They tried to take my company, my house, my dignity, and when I didn't hand them over, they forged signatures and filed lawsuits in my name. I looked directly at Tiffany. And you, my dear, were clever enough to think charm could hide greed. You married my grandson for his last name, then used mine to open doors you had no right to walk through. Her lips trembled. You can't prove that. Oh, but I can. Evelyn stepped forward and placed a flash drive on the table. Contained here are verified email chains between Tiffany and Harold, discussing fund transfers, property liquidation, and corporate manipulation. Each verified through metadata timestamps. The company counsel inserted the drive into the projector. Within seconds, Tiffany's words appeared in cold, glowing text. Once the old woman's name is off the papers, we can claim mental incompetence and take the assets. Gasps erupted. One board member muttered, "Good God." Tiffany lunged toward the screen. That's out of context. Context won't save you in court, David said calmly. I sat back down, folding my hands. You called me a gold digger, Tiffany. You laughed in my house, at my table, surrounded by the things I earned. But tell me, who's digging now? She stood, shaking. You won't get away with this. I tilted my head. I already have. The judge called for order. Given the evidence, he said, the board recognizes that Mrs. Henderson remains the legal owner and majority stakeholder of Henderson and Company. All allegations of mismanagement are dismissed. However, the matter of fraudulent activity by Harold and Tiffany Henderson will be referred to the authorities for further investigation. Tiffany's face went white. You can't. Court adjourned, he said firmly. The gavel hit the wood like a heartbeat. The moment the room cleared, Harold stood frozen. I walked toward him slowly. He looked smaller somehow, shoulders slumped, face pale, the arrogance drained away. Mom, he whispered. Please. I didn't mean. I stopped inches from him. Don't lie to me. You meant every bit of it. He swallowed hard. I was desperate. I just wanted my share. Your share. I said sharply. You had your share. You spent it. You had my trust, too. And you spent that even faster. He looked at the floor. I'm sorry. I studied him for a long moment. For the first time, I didn't see my son, I saw a stranger wearing his face. You're not sorry yet, I said quietly. But you will be. Then I turned and walked away. Outside, the reporters surged forward. Cameras flashed, microphones stretched out like hungry mouths. Mrs. Henderson, how does it feel to win? Will you press charges against your family? Is it true your daughter-in-law called you a gold digger? I paused at the top of the courthouse steps. The autumn wind lifted my gray hair, the sunlight catching the gold rim of George's pen in my hand. How does it feel to win? I repeated softly. It feels overdue. Then I walked through the crowd, the sound of shutters following like applause. That evening, I sat by the fire again, this time with Evelyn beside me. The house felt different, lighter, freer. We watched the evening news. Tiffany's tearful face filled the screen once again, but this time, the caption read. Henderson scandal, fraud investigation launched against couple. I turned off the TV. Silence returned. You did it, Evelyn said softly. No, I said. We did. She smiled. What will you do now? I looked at the gold pen resting between my fingers. Finish what I started. Which is setting the record straight. But just as the warmth of victory began to settle, the phone rang. David's voice came through, tight and serious. Margaret, there's something you should know. The investigation uncovered another transfer, one not in Tiffany's or Harold's names. It went to a silent partner's account. Someone inside the board helped them. I felt my stomach twist. Who? He hesitated. The name's still redacted in the report, but we'll have it by morning. I hung up slowly, staring into the flames. The fire crackled, spitting tiny sparks into the air. After all the betrayal, after all the proof, there was still another hand in the shadows. Someone else had been pulling strings. The victory I thought was complete had just become another beginning. And as I looked at George's pen glinting in the firelight, I whispered to myself, then we keep going. The night after the hearing, I didn't sleep. Victory can be loud in public, but quiet in the dark. The house was peaceful again, my house, yet I couldn't shake David's voice from my mind. A silent partner inside the board helped them. After everything I'd endured, the lawsuits, the humiliation, the slander, I still wasn't done. There was one more knife left in my back, and I didn't yet know whose hand held it. By sunrise, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't waiting for anyone to tell me the truth. I would find it myself. I drove to the office that morning without calling ahead. The staff greeted me with cautious smiles. The news of Tiffany and Harold's downfall had already spread. Some pretended not to stare, but I saw the looks, sympathy mixed with fear, as if I might fire them all on sight. Instead, I simply said, "Good morning." Evelyn met me at the elevator, holding a tablet. The auditors are still going through the offshore logs, she said. David expects an update within the hour. I nodded. Tell them to check for recurring wire routes. Whoever the silent partner is, they've been hiding in plain sight. When we reached my office, the view over the city looked clearer than it had in years. For a moment I thought of George, his hand on my shoulder, the smell of sawdust and cologne, his voice saying, "Always build with honesty, Maggie. Anything else crumbles." That memory grounded me. I was ready for the truth, whatever it cost. At 10:30 sharp, David called. "We have the name," he said grimly. "The silent partner is Robert Lang, your CFO." I froze. Robert. He'd been with us for 35 years. I'd attended his daughter's wedding, sent him fruit baskets when his wife was sick. He'd been there when George died. My voice came out calm but hollow. How much? Nearly $3 million in redirected assets. He's been funneling contracts to shell companies owned by Harold under false invoices. I closed my eyes. Bring him in. Today. David hesitated. Are you sure you want to face him personally? Yes, I said. After everything, I deserve to look the truth in the eye. Robert arrived that afternoon, pale and sweating under his pressed gray suit. He tried to smile when he entered. "Mrs. Henderson, I can explain." "Don't," I said sharply. "Sit down." He obeyed, folding his hands like a schoolboy waiting for punishment. I laid the bank documents in front of him, one by one. $3 million. 10 falsified vendor accounts. 26 forged invoices. And not 1 ounce of shame. He sighed, shoulders slumping. It wasn't supposed to go this far. They never say it is. He rubbed his temples. Harold promised it was temporary. He said you'd retire soon anyway, and the money would be reimbursed once the assets were liquidated. I thought I was protecting myself. I stared at him. Protecting yourself from what? Loyalty? Conscience? He looked up, eyes rimmed red. From being forgotten. That word hit harder than I expected. Forgotten. Maybe we were all afraid of that, growing old, fading out, being replaced by younger hands with shallower hearts. But fear never justified betrayal. You had decades of trust, I said softly. And you sold it for scraps. He hung his head. I'll resign immediately. Oh, you'll do more than that, I said. You'll testify. You'll tell the court exactly how Harold and Tiffany manipulated you, and how you helped them. He looked up sharply. If I do, they'll ruin me. I met his gaze without blinking. Then you finally understand what they did to me. By the end of the week, the story hit every major business outlet. Henderson CFO admits fraud scheme involving family members. Matriarch clears name, exposes multi-million-dollar scandal. Public sympathy swung my way like a pendulum. The same voices that mocked me as a senile relic now called me the Iron Matriarch who outwitted her heirs. Tiffany and Harold's assets were frozen pending trial. Their social circle abandoned them overnight. The house they'd moved into, the one she'd called modern and fresh, went up for sale within a month. I didn't celebrate. I just watched the for sale sign tilt in the wind and thought, poetic justice has good timing. One quiet evening, Matthew came to see me. It had been months since I'd seen my grandson. He stood at the gate like a stranger, holding a bouquet of wilted flowers. "Grandma," he said softly when I opened the door. I studied him carefully. His hair was longer, his eyes tired. There was no arrogance left, only guilt. "I didn't know," he said. "I swear I didn't. She told me you were losing your mind, that you were giving the company away to strangers." I believed her. I stepped aside. "Come in." We sat in the living room. The chandelier above us cast soft light over the same floor where Tiffany had once laughed at me. Matthew fidgeted. "She's gone. Moved back to her parents. I lost everything." "You didn't lose everything," I said quietly. "You lost what you borrowed from someone else. There's a difference." He swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." I nodded slowly. "Good. But don't apologize for me, Matthew. Apologize for yourself. You let them teach you how to mock people who loved you. Don't ever let anyone make you that small again." He looked down. "I don't deserve forgiveness." "Maybe not," I said. "But you can still earn redemption." He met my eyes. "How?" "Work," I said. "Real work. The kind your grandfather believed in. There's a position open in our community housing project. No office, no salary. Just service." He nodded, tears glinting in his eyes. "I'll do it." "Good," I said softly. "Then we'll start again." A month later, I officially stepped down from my role as CEO, not because I was forced to, but because I was finally free to choose it. Evelyn took over as director, with my full blessing. The board stood and applauded when I handed her George's pen. "You're sure?" she asked quietly after the meeting. "Yes," I said, smiling. "It's time the company had new hands, honest ones." She hesitated. "We'll miss you." I touched her shoulder. "Then do what I did. Keep building something worth missing." The press tried to get one final quote from me, of course. "Mrs. Henderson," one young reporter asked, "what's the secret to surviving betrayal, even from your own family?" I looked straight into the camera and said, "Survival isn't the goal. Clarity is. Once you see people for who they are, you stop bleeding for who they pretend to be." He blinked, surprised by the calm in my voice. "Do you forgive them?" I smiled faintly. "Forgiveness isn't a gift for them. It's freedom for me." Weeks later, I stood in the garden at dusk. The air smelled of lilacs and rain. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel haunted by bitterness, only memory. I thought about Harold, awaiting trial. About Tiffany, humiliated and exiled from the circles she worshipped. About Robert, who now spent his days writing apology letters to employees whose pensions he'd endangered. They all got what they wanted, attention. Just not the kind they'd hoped for. And Matthew? He sent me photos from the housing project every weekend, peeling paint repaired, playgrounds built, laughter echoing through holes once abandoned. It wasn't redemption yet, but it was a start. That night, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat beneath the chandelier one last time. The golden light shimmered across the room, soft and steady. I took George's pen and opened my journal. "Justice doesn't always roar," I wrote. "Sometimes it whispers through balance sheets and court orders, through signatures that can't be faked, through truth finally spoken aloud. Betrayal ages you, yes, but it also refines you. Like gold through fire. I paused, then added one last line. If family can destroy your peace, remember, family can also rebuild it, once you stop begging them to. I closed the book gently and looked toward the window, where the city lights blinked like distant stars. Somewhere, I hoped George was watching. Somewhere, I hoped he was proud. As the clock struck midnight, I whispered into the stillness, "They called me a gold digger, George. But all I ever wanted was to build something real. And now I have." Then I smiled, not for the past, but for the peace that finally felt earned. Because the truth, I realized, isn't something you inherit. It's something you fight for, one signature at a time. And if my story teaches anything, it's this. Never underestimate the quiet ones. Especially not the grandmothers who remember where every contract is buried.